welcome to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World. I'm James Rosenstein, a member of the advisory board of One Business World. Leading Entrepreneurs of the World features entrepreneurs, founders, and business leaders presenting on cutting-edge topics and the latest in industry developments. Our goal is to provide the global business and entrepreneurial communities with a window into the minds of those who are shaping the future of the world. Today, we are very happy to welcome leading environmental and water investor, advisor, and thought leader, Jud Hill. Jud Hill is the managing partner of Ecological Service Partners. Ecological Service Partners was established to capitalize on opportunities in environmental services and water-related investments. Supported by $250 million of committed equity, ESP is one of the best capitalized operators in the environmental services market. Jud has over 35 years of experience as an operator and private equity investor across the water resources, environmental services, and energy sectors. Jud has an established and successful investment track record as a private equity professional, having served as a managing director over the last 15 years with the Texas Pacific Group, the Halifax Group, and NGP Energy Capital Management. Prior to that, he was a managing director with HSBC, where he oversaw the firm's water and industrial services investment banking practice. Early in Jud's career, he served in executive management positions with Atlantic Richfield and Westinghouse Environmental Services. Jud also serves as a trustee of the Waterkeeper Alliance. Jud, it is a great pleasure and an honor to have you here with us today to hear more about the evolution of water investing. Thank you and welcome to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World.
Thank you, James. Appreciate the introduction. I've been in the water business. I know James just said 35 years, but I started in, I guess it was 1979. So it's been approaching 50 years now. I know I don't look it, but it's been almost 50 years. And I thought maybe the best way to talk about the evolution is maybe just walk through, my career path and what I've seen and done and how the water industry has evolved over those 50 years. Just point of perspective, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the 50s and 60s. And if you recall back in those days, the steel mills were blowing and going. The rivers were just highly polluted. As a point of reference, I guess it was 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught on fire because there was so much oil and pollution sitting on top of the water that somehow it caught fire. And that was a catalyst, if you will, and a wake-up call for the government to say, we got to do something about that. And that became the impetus for the Clean Water Act in 1973. And here we are almost 50 years later, next year, we have the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. As a kid growing up, I saw all the pollution and figured, gee whiz, I'd like to do something about that. And so I went to engineering school in environmental engineering to try to, think about ways that I could, help participate in solving some of these pollution issues. And I was fortunate enough that I was had a scholarship in grad school funded by the American Iron and Steel Institute to clean up all the coke oven wastewaters. And there was lots of ammonia and other pollutants. And we developed a whole line of bacteria and biological systems that dramatically reduced the amount of ammonia coming into the rivers. And that was, then the beginning of my career. And then again, the Clean Water Act really became the platform to begin water investing, because now you had a very strong piece of legislation. They spent the next, 3-4 years writing the regulations that were promulgated to implement the law. But that was really the catalyst for the last 50 years about how we invested by regulatory drivers in the water and wastewater business. Ironically, my first job out of grad school was to work for Atlantic Richfield, an oil company, but they had the idea of let's do a de novo startup and let's hire some guys right out of college that aren't biased by history of other water type activities and see if we can't start a new water company. And so I was fortunate enough to be hired by Atlantic Richfield. We started Arco Environmental, and we actually pioneered wastewater recycling, where we took wastewater, domestic wastewater, cleaned it up sufficiently so you could actually put it on a golf course or to, grass, common lands, etc. And that's pretty commonplace today, but that was pretty revolutionary back then. And we sold our turnkey systems to leverage developers in Aruba, Hilton Head, etc., where folks were out maybe $30-40 million in construction loans and found out for some reason they couldn't tap into the trunk line and they were about to go bankrupt. And so we came in and said, we'll design it, we'll permit it, we'll own it, we'll operate it. And they said, that's wonderful. And then we said, well, you're right. And here's the price. They said, gosh, that's expensive. They go, well, that's a solution. So that we grew a business in a matter of 2 years from a fresh start to 50 million in revenue and about 22 million bucks of EBITDA profit, cash flow. And it was a great beginning because we did design, we built them, we permitted them, we negotiated the contracts. And for a young guy, you couldn't ask for a better first job. And so Atlantic Richfield stayed in that business for 3 or 4 years and decided then to divest in all of its non-oil-based activities and get back to the classic oil business. And I decided to move on. And being in Pittsburgh, I helped Westinghouse start an environmental division. And for the next 10 years, we grew about $1.5 billion business. And it was, again, driven by regulation of water and wastewater. And back in the days, PCBs were a big deal, GE and Westinghouse. And so Westinghouse said, rather than pay someone else, let's solve our own problems. And then let's sell what we learned in the technologies and services that we have to other third parties. And again, that was the heyday, if you will, of the rollout of regulation and people spending money. Those are the days of Superfund and RCRA and TSCA, all the big regulatory drivers that initiated the cleanup of some pretty nasty problems, which were water, but also solid waste, hazardous waste, Love Canal, if you recall. So that was a very robust time for a business, and we were one of the leading players in the, I guess it was early 90s. Westinghouse decided to divest of its businesses non-core to Westinghouse. So I decided to start my own company, did that, an environmental services company, took it public, and then used a bank called HSBC, who had just come to the United States, to underwrite US securities. And I wanted them to underwrite my company because they had a great analyst. And they did, and they did a great job. Most of it was, offered up in the UK. It stayed there, it didn't come back to the trading desk. They did a great job. And then I became, ironically, mid-career, a banker of all things. HSBC asked me to run the bank, even though I wasn't a classic banker, because it was interesting because the guy that was running the bank said, I have lots of guys that are great bankers, but no one has a clue how to grow and run a company. I can make you a banker, I can't make them entrepreneurs. So with that, I said, sure, I'll give it a try. And we grew a pretty dynamic business. Again, fortunate in the time frame, but the water business was really rocking and rolling. There was a firm called US Filter, which was kind of the poster child in the 90s, where a guy named Dick Heckman started with a small $30-40 million acquisition. In a matter of 3 years, grew it to about 6.2 billion and sold it to Vivendi, now called Veolia. And the banking laws are a bit different. You could do a thing called pooling back in the day, and allowed you to roll these assets together in an accounting format that was much more attractive than having to redo the books every time you made an acquisition. And we were one of their bankers. And we did everything from IPOs to secondary convertible offerings, private investments in public, equities, the whole menu, which was a great experience. And at this point in time, again, the investing business was really booming. Money was showing up. People understood the water space. We were looking at, lots of wastewater issues because of the regulations were really coming down hard. Water utilities were growing dynamically. If you look at the water utility business, there's probably 50,000, believe it or not, water utilities in the United States, and probably 35,000 wastewater systems. Many of those are just small independent municipal operations, which, in many cases were political. Guy would win the job as the mayor and put his brother-in-law and his uncle, in running the wastewater system, which not a great idea, and lots of issues with compliance, et cetera. And so a lot of the consolidators, if you will, then Philly Suburban, American Water, United Water, had a Pac-Man strategy and really rolled up these assets to run them more efficiently, because you could run, 10 wastewater plants in a 20-mile radius more efficiently by, having parts, people, inventory, G&A, and then you could, one in a single operation. And so that caused a lot of investment opportunity, during that period of time. There was also a lot of activity in what are called water rights, and water rights, which you may be aware of, but in way back when everyone's going west, and a water right was actually awarded to a farmer that just went to the recording office and said, I have 10,000 acres, I'm going to grow hay. I'd like to, get the authority to use the right amount of water to grow my hay. And just by making a claim on that water, he was the first one to use it. They call it first in right, first in use, first in right. And that was back in the late 1800s. And that really caused a lot of, consternation. There was, out in California particularly, there was a lot of issues with who owned the water, how did it move, law of the river, etc. And so that became a big part of our business too, is investing in companies that understood how to invest in water rights and to be good stewards of water rights assets. I'll give you a few examples of those a little bit later, but it's a pretty dynamic business. So, while at HSBC, we banked a lot of folks, and here's a somewhat ironic. The Brits have a different perspective of how you pay folks. And I remember I had really great younger guys that were running deals, getting them done, and typically you get 10 to 15% of the value of the deal, or if you were the commission, the dollars received by the bank to the leading banker that was running it. And I had a younger guy that he was so good, did very well, and I went to London with my bonus plan, and I had him in the bonus pool for about $800,000. Remember, this is almost 25 plus years ago. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money today too. But they said, "You're crazy. We don't make those kind of bonus payments." And I said, "Well, in the U.S., it's eat what you kill." And gee whiz, if we'd paid him 1.5 million, then we'd have made 8 million, right? So it's the rule of volume. And so anyway, they said, "Nah, we don't want to do that." So we kind of disbanded that whole water practice because we couldn't keep the talent. They went off to other investment banks, and so at that point, the water investing business was very, very dynamic, and a lot of large private equity shops were now waking up to this whole waterfront, if you will, of water investing, not just in the U.S. but globally, and there was a lot of capital. This is again 20 years ago, and Texas Pacific Group, which is a very large private equity firm, which many of you may be aware of, they actually started a water fund, the first ones to do it, called Aqua International Partners. and it was being run by a guy named Bill Riley, who was the EPA administrator under Bush 41. Very dynamic, very smart guy, very well connected. And so when I was leaving the bank, they said, hey, you run water companies, you've been a banker, you'd be a great private equity guy because you know how to, get it done and also, run businesses. So I joined Texas Pacific Group. And again, the water space was starting to go global. We had a fund that had about $450 million committed to it. It was backed by Overseas Private Investment Corp. It's the US's vehicle to kind of stimulate emerging market countries. And so they provided us capital. And the great thing was 75% or 75% of our capital was supplied by OPIC, but it took equity risk and got paid back like debt. We said, this is great. But the challenge was we had to deploy capital, in OPIC qualified countries, emerging market countries. So we had to invest in bottled water in Tajikistan, drip irrigation in India, tanks in Mexico, beer in Russia, believe it or not. And again, water again was really becoming a very dynamic, investable sector. Again, still highly fragmented. And so we effectively deployed that capital, did pretty well. But actually, when you have country risk, currency risk, market risk, repatriation risk, the beta that creates to try to get IRRs and ROIs is a challenge. And so we probably made low single digits, and OPIC loved us. And we said that was way too much work for relatively modest returns because, we weren't philanthropists, we were capitalists, albeit we like, doing well by doing good. But our mission was to, create value for our limited partners and yes, ourselves. So with that, we didn't choose to do a follow-on fund, albeit the global market was still very dynamic. And I stayed at Texas Pacific Group for, another 10 years doing a whole range of water and wastewater investing. And again, a lot had to do with, water utilities and the water services sector, including things like bottled water. Bottled water is an extremely attractive business to invest in. You learn about, road, investment density of your delivery systems, where if you have a 2-mile radius covered and you're delivering bottled water, it's called home and office delivery. You would supply that. And then if you can get, 5, 6, 8 more customers in that same hub, that same spoke of the hub, it became an extremely profitable business. And a lot of folks entered the business. A lot of guys went public. One was called Primo, which we were involved with. And then this whole other aspect of investing came to the fore, where everyone's worried about the quality of water, be it lead or be it other contaminants. A lot of folks began using point of entry and point of use solutions. And many of like Brita filters and everyone made a different filter. And that also became a very profitable business. And that got rolled up by a lot of folks. And again, people talk about the water sector and they struggle with the fact that, there is not one vertical, one dynamic. And, for example, GE Water tried to, adopt their basic premise that, they want to be first or second in any business to actually stay in a business. And I think they realized that this water is so highly fragmented, from water utilities to in-house services to industrial, treatment of cooling towers, water rights. It's highly fragmented and dynamic. It's like the oil business, from everywhere from when you find the oil to when you deliver it retail at a gas pump. There's a lot of things in between. And water is a very, similar commodity. It's interesting too, because there's an old saying, water is not a free good, albeit we treat it almost as such. We look at, electricity, it's not free. Cable, it's not free. But people perceive that, gee, water falls from the sky and, it should almost be a constitutional right. It should be delivered for free. And that's been a debate for a long time. But if you need to transport the water and you got to treat the water, and that takes money. It's somewhat ironic. I teach a course at American University on environmental capitalism as a guest lecturer, and I find it interesting. But I'll always ask, the class, where did oil close at today? And WTI closed at $62. I said, oh, that's probably about right. Where did water close at today? What do you mean water? Water doesn't have, a commodity trade to it. It closes out every day. Oh yeah, you're right. But just as a hypothetical, what if you went over to your tap and, a barrel of oil is 40 gallons. Take a 40-gallon bucket and go to your tap and fill it up. What do you think that costs you to fill up that 40-gallon of water? And, they pause and say, geez, I don't know, 50 cents, 75 cents. No one has perspective on water. I said, how about 2.5 cents? I said, well, that's pretty inexpensive. I said, yeah, it surely is. I said, what if I double the price of water? Would you care? Oh, hell yeah, I'd care. Geez, I don't need to double the price of my water. I said, why? It's a Starbucks a week. You don't pay very much for water, albeit, it is truly almost the only need you actually have. All the rest are wants. Gas in your car, it's a want. It's not a need to survive. But if you don't have water, you're going to be gone in 7 days. So for something that's so critical to our lives as water, we're not very good stewards, and it's highly underpriced. And I always encourage grad students. I said, don't you want to get into a business where you could, if you could double the price of the product you're selling, the market will take it because it needs the water and it is still highly inexpensive. And that's a great place to invest, where you could double, even triple the cost of the services you provide and still be in business. And they go, oh, that's pretty interesting. And so I think it creates a level of perspective of, water and how we treat it. And the old argument, water is not a free good, but we treat it as it should be a free good. And that, I think, is now causing a lot of people to wake up a little bit. I mean, we all talk about sustainability and ESG. In the last few years, it's become front and center. It's not just a passing thing. It's going to be here. And many limited partners, pension funds, endowments, family offices, et cetera, are now very selective of how they invest into general partnerships, private equity firms, and how they think about sustainability and ESG. And it's not just, check the box. It's some qualitative exercise, I'm sorry, that people do. Sustainability is front and center for lots of these pension funds. And, the old saying goes, no one's bigger than your LPs. So you're going to adjust and modify your behavior to what your LPs want to do. So now we probably have, almost $1 trillion of dry powder in the private equity world, with a moniker of sustainability and ESG. And in that vein, people think, geez, what's ESG? How sustainable can that be? Well, water's front and center. What better ESG or sustainability than how do you treat or recycle, reuse, or become a better steward of water? I'll give you a couple of examples. My current fund, called Ecological Service Partners, we invest in restoring wetlands and streams. It sounds like a very philanthropic activity. It is, we call it doing well by doing good. But under the Clean Water Act, there's a section called Section 404 that says, if you as a developer impact jurisdictional wetlands, which is almost everything as a jurisdictional wetland, and you're building a big LNG plant, or you're expanding a port, or you're building a road expansion, you're required by law before you begin construction to mitigate the impact you're about to have on those jurisdictional wetlands. And the way the law is structured is that the way you solve for that mitigation is that there are folks like our firm that will actually go into that same watershed and find areas that were heavily impacted by storm or subsidence or bad animal husbandry, and they just destroyed the streams, etc. We'd come in and restore those to their original pristine condition of where they were, 100 years ago. And our strategy, like others, it was simple. We'd find 5,000 or 10,000 acres that had this what we call biological lift, and then we get a long option on the land, and say for 2 years. And during that 2-year period, we'd go and get our permits, which are complicated with the Corps of Engineers and other regulators. And that's one of the barriers to entry. If you don't know how to, run the trap lines with the Corps and other regulators, you're not going to get there. At the same time, you're also talking to potential customers that are going to buy those credits from you once you have that wetland restored, and the Corps allows you to put these credits on what's called a ledger. So long story, but it's a niche business. But you love a business where the third or fourth thing the customer is going to ask you is price. They care about schedule, they care about quality, they care about our balance sheet that we can deliver, and they really don't care about our price, because if you're building $1 billion LNG plant and you got to have the credits to offset your impacts, if our credits make it up, we're $10 million. It's a rounding error for $1 billion facility, but we're the gating item to initiate construction. So, they don't care what our margins are, and we make, very good margins. There's some that try to self-mitigate, try to build their own wetlands, and probably 90% of those fail. So the Corps of Engineer, highly discourages that and drives folks to the private sector, guys like us. So that's an example of water investing, which seems arcane, but it's a critical need, particularly now as you look at, some component of the infrastructure bill. Something's going to pass, but we're going to have a lot of money being spent on ports, bridges, roads, LNG plants, etc., that are going to, drive that water investing sector. Another great example in water investing is when I was at a group called NGP, Natural Gas Partners, now owned by Carlyle. The CEO of the firm, very smart gentleman, had really the idea of how do we figure out how to invest across sectors, oil, water, agriculture, etc. And we spent about a year putting together a strategy, and we called it Global Adaptation Partners, knowing that we're at 7+ billion people, we're going to be way short water. It wasn't being treated, appropriately or priced appropriately. Energy was an issue. Ag was a big issue in how you looked at water being consumed, and all this what they call non-point source runoff. Farmers put a lot of fertilizer on their property, and they have the water to do it. And believe it or not, in some cases, half, if not more, of those fertilizers leave the farm, go to the receiving stream right next to the farm, and cause algal blooms, fish kills, what's called eutrophication. And so you're just washing money out to the stream, and you're flooding your fields because your water was essentially free, and it was not really good ag practice. And if you recall earlier, I mentioned that there's what's called the law of prior appropriation or water rights. And out west, first in use, first in right. If you had 1870, 1880 water, and you're the first guy to claim it, and there is a drought on the Colorado, if you have the most senior water, you can get all of your water. If you had, make it up, 1920, 1930 water, you're junior, you may lose half or substantially, in theory, all of your water. Not that it's justified, but that's how the rules work. So if I have 1870 water and I'm very senior on the river, I'm going to get my water, and I'm growing alfalfa or cotton, whatever, and you have much junior water, and you have a big walnut grove, and you get carved back on your water supply, your trees are going to die. That's dumb. So the way it works is I can sell you my water for the next 5 years or half of my water. So I'm able to make money by, figuring out how to optimize where's the best value of water, on the Colorado River, for example. In that same vein, and this is now a great strategy for water investing, we would, in Arizona, we went out and looked for land that had very senior water rights on the farm, and we paid ag price, say $4,000 or $5,000 an acre. And our strategy was, we think we could farm with maybe 1/3 of the water we were entitled to use under our water right. And typically you get 3 acre-feet of water per acre. It's an allocation. And so we said, we could do it for less. And so we invested into the property and did things like laser leveling, drip irrigation, micro irrigation, became much more aware of water as a critical asset and much better stewards of the asset. Because in many cases, you're pumping from the groundwater, and if you don't manage it properly and you over pump an aquifer, and aquifer is a pretty fragile piece of geology, and you over pump it, 2 things can happen. You can have saltwater intrusion, or it actually collapses like a sinkhole. And when that happens, it's gone forever. It's done. Once you salt an aquifer because you pumped it too hard, you had intrusion, you've lost it. So we said, we're going to be better stewards of this water asset. We're going to only use maybe 1/3 of the water, and you do the right things to, so we could do that, laser leveling, etc. And we found out that yes, we could, but we also found out that when you applied water more efficiently, that we use less what's called phosphorus, nitrogen, potash, the input fertilizers, and our cost of goods dropped, so we didn't have a lot of fertilizer. And surprisingly, our yields stayed the same, if not improved, because we're only feeding the plants or the crop when they were thirsty or they were appropriately, hungry to uptake the appropriate fertilizers. And all the what they call non-point source runoff dropped dramatically. So we were better stewards of the environment. So we didn't have, fish kills and algae and all the other things that happen, around a farm. And same thing's true with livestock. That's also a large, piece of the business of, trying to keep livestock out of the creeks and reduce, the pollution that way. So in any event, we found out that our yields improved, our cost of goods went down a bit, and the other 2/3 of the water that we still owned and had the right to use, we then could wholesale that water to local community. And out west, in many areas, if you don't have a 100-year assured water supply, you can't get a building permit. So the old saying of location, location, location is partially true. It's really water, water, water. And if you're in Arizona looking to build a big, chip plant or, the next, Tesla battery facility, your issue is water. And water is such a critical issue. It's at the board level about, water scarcity, water use, water laws, etc. And so we were able to take that other 2/3 of the water and act as a wholesaler. Didn't want to be in the water utility business. We could guarantee a long-term supply of water to the community, so they could actually, build homes, build appropriate, next generation factories, etc. So that water became the catalyst to economic growth for the community. And without that water, it would have stifled the growth. So it's interesting to think about how water can, do more than just be something you drink, but it becomes the fundamental, liquid to, make industry and communities work. And now other folks are practicing that strategy, but in doing so, not only do you make great money for your limited partners in investing, but you're a much better steward of the asset, and you own it, for the long term. An interesting story. We were buying land and talking to local communities, and one very nice old lady said, you private equity guys, you're going to come in here and you're going to take up all the water, and you're going to quadruple the price, and you're going to rape and pillage, and we politely said, no, man, that's not what we will do. We're here for the long term, and we're here to hopefully make money for all of us. And so I said, let me give you an example. And a few counties over, the mayor was in control of the water asset, the aquifer, and the geologist walked into the mayor's office, who's up for re-election, and said, hey, Mr. Mayor, we're in a tight drought here. If we keep pumping on this aquifer, again, saltwater intrusion or get partial collapse, and if we restrict the water, all your voters, the grass is gonna, turn brown, or it's going to impact other parts. And of course that mayor said, how sure are you? And he says, well, there's no guarantees in any of this stuff. You could be fine. He goes, heck with it, keep on pumping. I want to get my job next year. Well, for us, under that same set of conditions, if we knew there's a drought occurring and we're going to pump our aquifer too hard, we're going to say, sorry, folks, I don't care if your grass turns brown. We're going to reserve this water for the long term, so it's here when we need it, and not just to make voters happy, keep their grass green. And that creates a point of perspective. They said, okay, that kind of makes sense. I guess you guys are good guys. And again, one thing about the water business, it's an emotional good. A lot of folks don't care about their electricity. Okay, it's green, and you can pick those choices. I don't mean to, diminish that impact. But, when people say, we're gonna, move our water from the panhandle of Texas and build a giant pipeline and put a straw in the Okolala aquifer, we're gonna pipe that water down to Dallas, people go crazy, because that's their water. They don't want to see it leave. So again, understanding water investing, particularly in the water rights space, you got to really understand how emotional that asset is. The old saying, Mark Twain said, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. And that was so true out west, back in the early 1900s, where they, Owens Valley, which is, northern part of California, they were, controlling the water, and LA and other folks weren't getting their fair share. And they really had the water wars. If you ever get bored sometime, Google up or go to Netflix and look at a movie called Chinatown. It was Jack Nicholson's, one of his first movies, actually. And it talks about just what happened during those water wars. It's really a good flick. So I guess, where we are today, as I mentioned, there is lots of money chasing the water industry. Many investors don't really understand how to invest in water, understanding the emotional nature of the good, or how to pick a sector to invest in. A lot of folks say, oh, be in the water utility business. That sounds pretty good. Well, water utilities are a regulated asset. And as an investor, if you try to roll up a bunch of water utilities and exit, and you created all these synergies and saved money, and you're now going to try to make money, the regulators will say, I don't want you making money, on our customer base, and they will, throttle your ability to make good returns. So very few private equity firms, have invested in the water utility, business in the classic sense. But a lot of folks look at, again, as I mentioned, point of use, point of entry, and now, depending on how this infrastructure bill plays out, it's $55 billion, could be even $100 billion dedicated to water and wastewater. Most folks don't appreciate that when you look at our water and wastewater infrastructure, much of it was built when that Clean Water Act first came out in the early 80s, and it was built with a 40 or 50-year life. And now these pipes are just, collapsing, corroding, etc., both water and wastewater. And now there's a very robust industry to go in and retrofit and rebuild this U.S. infrastructure. And EPA and others estimate there's probably over $800 billion of need to just rehabilitate and restore our wastewater systems. And what's classic is, again, not faulting it, but many community leaders, mayors, county commissioners look at water and wastewater and say, you know what, I got a limited budget. I should put it in the police force or fix potholes or build a park. Whereas water and wastewater, it's underground, out of sight, out of mind. I'll kick the can, let the next guy worry about it. Classic behavior. Well, the kick in the can has kind of run its course. And now we have very critical needs. So, and there are a lot of very interesting technologies and systems being used to do in situ pipe bursting. And I'll give you another point of perspective. In California, for example, everyone's talking about their carbon footprint, and energy, reducing energy consumption. And about 20% plus 25% of California's energy is used to move water. Water's heavy. And so you got to figure that out. And many of the piping systems throughout the country, we lose about 25% of the water through exfiltration, leaky pipes. So you spend all this money to treat the water to potable consumption purposes, and then you push all this energy to move it out to the homes, and you'll lose 25% of it through exfiltration, leaky pipes. The carbon footprint is huge of what's lost through poorly run and managed and poorly maintained water and wastewater systems. Again, I would argue that's a great place to invest in, going forward. There's some other, little drivers too. I'll finish up here in a second. People, hear about what are called trace pharmaceuticals, endocrine disruptors. Now we have so many pharmaceuticals, in our water, in our wastewater, where it goes down your house system, and it goes into a wastewater treatment plant. But the wastewater treatment plant, which are basically biology, bugs, and physical and chemical ways to get things out, doesn't do a thing to take out these trace pharmaceuticals. And now they're finding out that, the water, in some cases, the wastewater pipe goes out at mile 1, and 2 miles down the river, an intake pipe is, taking it out to, provide drinking water. And those trace pharmaceuticals now are getting out into the drinking system. And, you got, all kind of, Zoloft and other things that actually show up, and albeit at small amounts, they're now showing that they could have a deleterious effect on children. Well, if you want to look at a way to increase point of use and point of entry, and particularly with moms, is begin to show there's indications that, these trace pharmaceuticals are problematic, you'll see an explosion of point of entry and point of use solutions to get these trace pharmaceuticals, out of the water. And we, Flint, Michigan, everybody talks about Flint, Michigan, there's going to be a huge expense there. But that's a classic case of they just changed the chemistry of the water. So the pH dropped, I forget what it was, but that causes the lead to leach out of the pipe. And when that happened, they're cooked. Again, trying to save money, not understanding the chemistry of the engineering. So a lot to cover, a lot to be done, but I maintain, I've been at it now 50 years, water is a great place to be. It's not going away. It's a need, not a want. And I'd encourage anybody to enter the business, but I argue you really have to understand engineering, biology, some technology to really understand the sectors, and by all means understand that water is an emotional good. So thank you.
Thank you, Jud. This is such an amazing topic. It's something that we, as you said, we don't really think about, but water is essential. Just as a quick summary for people who are not familiar with investing in water, would you say that the main focus of investing is provision of water, management, depollution, cleaning, and sale of water? Are those the areas where investments focus?
Yes, I mean it's all the above. And I guess as you want to invest in the water sector, we all look for ways to create, better returns, a return on investment or an IRRs, et cetera. And you need to find a niche to play in, rather than be a commodity. So again, I use the example of, the intersection of water and ag. That's a huge opportunity to understand those investments. And relative to, water treatment, as I mentioned, trace pharmaceuticals, and now there's gonna be a lot of money spent to improve that infrastructure. That's a great place to be. And I think relative to, pricing of water is going up. But again, you can double it and not change behavior. Whereas if I double the price of oil or I double the price of your cable bill, that's a real change. It affects your life and your profits. But double the price of your water, it doesn't matter. And I think as people think about being better stewards of water as the asset class, I think the opportunities are they're not endless, but knowing where to invest and how to invest is really the secret sauce of making money in the water business. And we live in a litigious society, but you got to figure out ways to, solve those problems. And one of the things I do is I'm a trustee of Waterkeeper Alliance, which is a very large global nonprofit that funds folks that actually are stewards of a river, an estuary, a bay, etc. And they're very dedicated, driven folks, and that's their careers, and we help support them. Those are the ones, in many cases, that will catalyze change. And they'll have a set of lawyers that will work pro bono, and actually enforce the law and make the polluter do the right thing. And I do think that now with ESG and sustainability, and not just limited partners in private equity, but large investors, pension funds that are investing in large corporations, they're going to have strong drivers to say, quit jerking around, fix it, clean it up, or we may sell your equity, or we may change out the management. But those aren't casual exercise anymore. Those are real issues at the board level.
So you can put pressure on them if they're unwilling to fulfill the requirements of for example, the Clean Water Act. Correct.
Yep. That's and good. I think now that the shareholders are the biggest hammer. Now you get a lot of activists on the board, saying let's spend the money. I'll give you a great example. We look at what are called CAFOs, centralized animal feeding operations, for hogs and for beef. And they are major contributors to pollution and receiving streams, and all that manure and urine just flows into the river. And even the Purdue's of the world, Smithfield Foods, the incremental cost of trying to do the right thing is so small relative to impact on the price of the product, and it's polluting aquifers, and there aren't regulatory drivers. The reason for that is, in that scenario, is that the Purdue's of the world have figured out, we're going to actually contract out all of our poultry to thousands of small little growers, like in the Delmarva Peninsula where I live, in Maryland. And so they're going to toll out the the water, the hormones, whatever else they need to grow the chicken, and they loan the money to the farmer. And then after whatever it is, I don't know, 20 weeks, they come back and get the chicken ready to go to market, and they give them 10% margin. And he goes, "Thanks a lot for the chickens, but all that manure and wastewater in the giant lagoon out in the back 40, that's yours, not mine." And the farmer doesn't have the financial wherewithal to really deal with that. And then the legislator and the regulator says, "Hey, regulators, lighten up on my guys. They just don't have the money." And so that's one way they get out of that problem, because they don't own the waste. So there's got to be a ways to solve that, to say, "Hey, you guys are going to own the wastewater as well as you own the chicken, and clean the mess up."
Yeah, very interesting. Now, so much talk about climate change. And for example, the drought and the tremendous lack of water out west, Colorado River going down, governments preventing certain societies or companies or areas from getting water. Where do you see this going in terms of investment?
Well, it's interesting to say that because there is a lot of investment now in the Western U.S., California particularly, as far as how water is managed and priced. And last year was a major drought in California. The snowpack was a lot lower, and now water, therefore the runoff was less. And you look at Lake Mead, you look at other big reservoirs, they're at historical low levels. And so now they're looking at ways, and to California's credit, they now have legislation that's promulgated and in place where they're actually encouraging, if not enforcing, folks to do water storage, so that you actually figure out ways to store water, so it's there, during the drought and in the growing season, and look at it as a more holistic asset rather than just as because in some cases, if you don't take the water when it goes by the front door in a big, in the spring, you lose it, all right? And so now they're looking at better ways to take that water, put it in the aquifer, manage it, recycle, reuse it, treat it so it doesn't contaminate the aquifer. So this whole, ecosystem now is really starting to play out about how to value water and treat water as the critical good that it is. So it's, California and the Western US, I think, is a great place to understand, water rights investing, water storage, water reuse, et cetera, is a very dynamic business. And, call it global warming, pick your term, but, we will continue to have droughts, and population is growing. We use a lot of water. In the southern part of, California, they build giant reverse osmosis plants. They are very expensive to make in water. They're great, but that drives up the price of water. Again, not to change anybody's lives, but I think we're seeing the whole ecosystem change as far as how farmers think, how water utilities think, how the irrigation districts think, to really look at water as a critical good that it is.
Right. Well, it's such a big topic. We could go on for a long time, but I really want to thank you, Jud, for your time very much. It's so interesting and important, and for all of us to recognize and understand. So we really appreciate your presentation as part of the Leading Entrepreneurs of the World series. It will certainly have a big impact, and we thank you very much.
Quite welcome. Appreciate it. Thank you.